One of my favorite things about the Resident Evil series is the interesting creatures that it brings to the table with every new adventure. From the hunters of the Spencer Mansion to the Garradors of the Salazar Castle, the series has been giving us memorable monsters for its entire run, and Resident Evil 2 is certainly no exception. So today I thought it would be fun to go through the beasts that this game introduces and give you a list of some of my favorites that are stalking the Raccoon City streets. Keep in mind that this is my list, and as such will almost certainly differ from yours, so feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. All that being said, let's kick this list off with... If there's one enemy that I dread facing in the RE2 remake, it would have to be the Ivy zombies that you encounter in the belly of Umbrella's nest facility. I think more than any other creature that I faced in this game, this is the one that I've died to the most, thanks to a combination of my lack of aiming skill and their ability to one-hit kill you if you don't have a sub-weapon to block their attacks. This ability to finish me off with such ease always makes me apprehensive to take this toothy foliage on, as I remember dying to them more than a few times on the narrow catwalks of the greenhouse. However, it's not only their power that I admire these creatures for, but also their introduction to the player. You walk into one of the laboratories of the Nest facility, only to see an overgrown room with Plant 43 pinning a person to the reinforced glass. Then, following your only path, you see that it's not only the greenhouse, but this entire section of the lab that's overgrown, with a body of an ivy dangling from the vines of the plant just above your head. I don't know why, but this scene of this dangling ivy sticks with me, even though it doesn't attack you until you pass back through later in the game. So for these reasons, the ivy takes the number 5 spot on this list. On the short list of my favorite animals, coincidentally the first 2 Resident Evil games feature 2 of them. Resident Evil 1 featuring the unforgettable great white shark Mother Neptune, and Resident Evil 2 featuring an appearance from a giant tea-infected sewer alligator. Unfortunately, the alligator is a much less prominent foe than Mother Neptune, but it's still one of my favorite foes from Resident Evil 2. We know virtually nothing about this beast, not why it's down here, nor the particular circumstances of its infection. The only real plausible reason being a reference to the old myth of baby alligators being flushed down toilets and winding up growing up in populated city sewer systems. This lack of any real reason or even reference makes the alligator a pretty big shock if you aren't expecting it.
What the hell?
Stay sharp. God only knows what's down here.
Outside of that, there's really not much to say about this thing. It's a short encounter that doesn't even amount to any real combat in the remake, making it even more obscure and thus more confusing. Despite that, however, it's still a memorable section, and we seemingly get a reference to it in RE7 with the crew of the internet show called Gators. So for the fact that I like the animal and appreciate its random inclusion in the series, the alligator bites into number 4 on my list. If you asked me about the G enemies before my lore videos on this game, I would have had very little to tell you. I wasn't impressed by them, they were ugly and not in a cool way, their introduction to the player was kind of weak, and they just didn't really make much sense to me as to why they were even there. However, now that I've looked into them and know their story, they're actually one of my favorite creatures that Resident Evil 2 has to offer. To understand the G's is to understand the G virus, and how it works within a person's mind and body. For a very brief explanation, those infected with G seek out others with similar DNA structures to infect in hopes of expanding their species. Once Birkin was let loose on the city, this is what he did to anyone similar enough to him. But without a very specific match, the results would be this disgusting mix between a bag of tumors and the monsters from Stranger Things. This backstory was something that really boosted my opinions on a creature that I just wasn't that interested in. It's catapulted this thing from maybe not even making the list, all the way into the third position of my favorites. However, outside of how neat it was to learn about its place in the world, I'm still not that fond of it visually. And with how strange and different it is, I feel like it could have made a bigger splash if they dedicated some more time to it during the remake. It's hard to imagine the RE2 remake without the T-00. Almost everything that I see coming from this game on YouTube is related to him and his never-ending conquest to murder you. As such, in my mind, even more so than someone like Birkin, I associate T-00 with this game. He's become the standout enemy of it simply because of the fanfare that seems to surround him, similar to what Lady Dimitrescu would later go on to do for Resident Evil 8. I think my favorite thing about this tyrant is that he is a direct continuation of events that proceeded in RE1. The tyrant of that game couldn't really be controlled, and Umbrella's figured out how to remedy that with this newer model. Obviously, being a big fan of the lore, it's interesting to see them continue on with such a well-known enemy from the first game. However, outside of those two things, I'm not the biggest fan of his design. I'm more into the fantastical drastic transformations that these creatures undergo. So, with Mr. X just essentially being a gray man in a black trench coat, it doesn't inspire much interest from me personally. I do like that he undergoes a transformation after he loses his jacket, but we only get to see that for Leon's final showdown, so it's pretty short-lived. That being said though, he's the first enemy that comes to mind when I think of this game, so I feel it's only right to give the T-00 the second spot on this list. Resident Evil has a handful of enemies that sort of transcend their game and have become iconic to the series. Of course, you have the Hunters, the Tyrants, or even the Regenerators, but for my money, no creature is as iconic to this series as the disgustingly beautiful Licker. There's just something about this BOW that sticks with you. Be that its elongated tongue, its ability to cling to walls, or just its visual distinction. However, if I was truly going to make a guess at what makes this monster so unique, it would have to be the gameplay change-up that it represents in its inability to see the player. The Lickers have mutated in a way that has rendered them blind, making it so that they have to hear their prey in order to attack. This makes encounters with them particularly interesting because you typically don't have to fight them, and generally it's not worth it to waste the ammo. So you sneak around, fearing that the slightest creak in the floorboards could force you into a battle. It's a fun change up from your typical traversal of Resident Evil 2 locations. Of course, that's not to say that these BOWs don't have their downsides. I don't particularly think their lore is overly interesting or very well documented. They seem to be similar to Crimson Heads in that they're zombies that have further mutated beyond their initial zombie stage. Suggestions being that they're zombies that have consumed enough biomass to evolve. But despite this somewhat lackluster backstory, I still think the mechanics, visuals, and legacy of this beast more than qualify it for the number one spot on this list. Anyways, those are my picks. What are yours? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I should also say that I didn't consider Birkin for this list because even though he is basically just a monster by the time we encounter him in this game, I still consider him to be more of a character than an enemy. If I did include him, he would probably be second, edging out the T-00. Regardless though, thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all in the next one.